She opened the door with a teasing smile, and in that moment, late rent was the least of my worries. I stood at the bottom of the short stone steps, staring at her front door as if it were the entrance to another world. The late afternoon sun spilled golden light across the porch, catching on the polished brass of the door handle. My palms were damp. Rent was due 3 days ago, and all I had were apologies and a promise to catch up soon. When I finally knocked, it was soft at first, almost hesitant. Then again, firmer this time. A few seconds later, the door opened with a gentle creak. She appeared, framed by the warm light of her hallway like a portrait come alive. Elaine, my landlady, 42, carried herself with a kind of quiet elegance that always caught me off guard. Her dark hair was swept loosely over one shoulder, and a silk blouse in pale ivory set off the warmth in her skin. Her eyes, steady, brown, amused, met mine with that familiar, teasing spark. "Well," she said, leaning her shoulder lightly against the doorframe. "Look who remembered where I live." Her voice was soft but edged with playfulness. I felt a flush rise to my cheeks. I'm sorry about the rent. Things have been a little tight this month, but she raised a hand delicately, stopping my nervous rambling. "Relax. I'm not throwing you out." Her lips curved into a knowing smile. "You're late, but not lost." The scent of jasmine floated from the hallway, wrapping around me as subtly as her words. There was something disarming about standing there with her watching me, not in judgment, but as if she could read every thought I was trying to hide. "Come in," she said at last, stepping back with a graceful tilt of her head. "We'll talk about it properly inside." For a moment I hesitated, caught in the odd intimacy of the doorway. The fading sun brushed against my back while the soft interior light beckoned from within. She didn't rush me. She simply stood there, one hand resting lightly on the door, her presence calm and assured. I finally stepped over the threshold. The wooden floor creaked softly beneath my shoes. The warmth of her home enveloped me instantly, book-lined walls, a faint record playing somewhere in the background, the quiet hum of a place lived in. She closed the door behind me with a soft click, and I felt something shift in the air. It wasn't just about rent anymore. The moment I stepped into her kitchen, I realized how different it felt from the rest of the house. It was warm in a lived-in way, bathed in soft amber light from a pendant lamp above the table. A teakettle hissed gently on the stove. She moved with an ease that made everything around her feel slower, more deliberate. "Sit," Elaine said, gesturing toward the round wooden table near the window. "Tea first. Rent talk later." I opened my mouth to protest, but she was already reaching for a set of delicate porcelain cups. "Really, it's fine," she added over her shoulder, sensing my hesitation. "You look like you need something warm more than I need excuses right now." I sat, awkward at first, then slowly relaxing into the chair. The late afternoon sun slipped through gauzy curtains, painting soft patterns on the table. A faint melody drifted from another room, a vinyl record, old but clear, like something from another era. When she placed the cup in front of me, our fingers brushed. Just for a second. Her skin was warm, soft. I don't think she meant for the touch to linger, but it did something to me anyway. "So," she began, sitting opposite me and crossing her legs in one smooth motion. The fabric of her skirt whispered against the chair. "Why the delay this month? You're usually early." I hesitated, feeling the weight of her gaze. It wasn't harsh. It was attentive. The kind of look that made you want to tell the truth. "I picked up extra shifts, but payments from one of my freelance projects are late," I admitted. "Everything's kind of stuck in limbo." She nodded slowly, stirring her tea without looking away from me. "Life has a way of doing that," she said softly. "You think you've got the rhythm down, and then," she snapped her fingers lightly, smiling with a trace of empathy. "It changes tempo." We talked then, not about rent, not about deadlines, but about work, plans, the small frustrations that filled the spaces between. She shared stories about her early 30s, about building the house alone after her divorce. She laughed easily, eyes lighting up in a way that made her seem younger and older at the same time, like someone who had weathered storms but still found warmth in small things. Every so often, she'd tilt her head while listening, like she was memorizing my words. I found myself talking more than I expected. The tea warmed my hands. Her presence warmed something else entirely. Somewhere between sips and shared confessions, the distance between landlady and tenant began to blur. By the time we finished our tea, dusk had slipped in quietly, painting the windows in deep purples and fading gold. Elaine stood, gathering the cups with a soft clink. "Come," she said casually, "it's warmer in the sitting room." I followed her down a narrow hallway lined with framed photographs, snapshots of travels, family, a life lived fully. She paused briefly to light the sconces, their glow flickering gently against the walls. When we entered the sitting room, the first thing I noticed was the fireplace, a small, brick one, with a soft orange flame licking the logs. The crackle of burning wood filled the silence in a comforting rhythm. She motioned for me to sit on the armchair across from her favorite spot, a cushioned seat near the fire. She tucked one leg beneath her, glass of red wine in hand. She offered me water, keeping things respectful, but it wasn't the drink that mattered. It was the space she was opening. For a while, we talked about ordinary things, neighborhood quirks, her cat who had apparently decided to ignore guests, books we both liked. Her voice had a soft rhythm, the kind that made you want to keep listening. At some point, the conversation turned inward. Maybe it was the fire. Maybe it was the way the shadows softened the edges of everything. I found myself saying more than I planned, about the way this year had felt like walking on thin ice, how I was working late nights, trying to keep my dreams alive without disappointing anyone. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer shallow sympathy. She simply listened, her chin resting gently on her hand, eyes fixed on me in a way that made my words feel safe. Then, unexpectedly, she exhaled softly and leaned back. "You know," she said, her voice lower now, "it's strange. I built this house after my divorce thinking it would be a place full of people. Dinner parties, friends, maybe family visiting. But most nights, it's just me. The fire. Silence." Her gaze shifted to the flames for a moment. In that flickering light, I saw something rare, not the composed, teasing woman at the door, but someone quietly carrying the weight of her own solitude. The air between us changed. It wasn't flirtation now. It was something deeper, two people, from different points in life, finding an unexpected moment of truth. I leaned forward slightly, elbows on my knees. She met my eyes again. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The fire spoke for us, crackling softly in the hush that followed. The night had settled fully now, laying a quiet stillness over the house. The fire had burned low, casting soft amber shadows across the room. I stood to leave reluctantly, not because I had anywhere pressing to be, but because something about being here, with her, had settled into me like warmth after a long chill. As I moved toward the hallway, she followed, the click of her low heels soft against the wooden floor. Her voice broke the comfortable silence. "So," she said lightly, "about that rent." I froze mid-step, halfway to the door. She stood a few paces behind me, arms folded gently, one eyebrow raised in mock seriousness. The playful glint in her eyes made it impossible to mistake her tone for sternness. I turned slowly, already stumbling over excuses. I promise I'll have it in a few days." I didn't mean to. She raised a hand, laughing softly, the sound light and teasing. "Relax. I'm not sending a collection agency after you." Then, with that same mischievous tilt of her head she'd given me at the doorway earlier, she stepped closer. "But if you insist on making it up to me," she let the sentence hang. My heart thumped louder than it should have. Her fingertips brushed my forearm, not a grab, not a pull, just a feather-light touch that sent a ripple of awareness up my skin. You could help me fix the light upstairs, she said finally, eyes narrowing playfully. It's been flickering for weeks. Consider it partial rent. The relief that left my chest came with a laugh. Yeah. Sure. Of course. She nodded toward the staircase. Come on then, handyman. As we walked down the narrow hallway, the dim sconces created pools of golden light between stretches of shadow. Her perfume, light jasmine with a hint of something woodsy, lingered in the air, trailing behind her like a secret. She walked with quiet confidence, occasionally glancing back at me over her shoulder with a knowing smile that made it hard to breathe normally. When we reached the foot of the stairs, she paused and turned to face me fully. Try not to electrocute yourself, she said, grinning. I'll do my best, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. There was nothing overt in that moment, no declaration, no touch that crossed lines, but something in the way she looked at me, steady and playful, pulled me further into the orbit of her world. The hallway, with its dim lights and close walls, suddenly felt smaller, and warmer. The upstairs hallway was narrower, the ceiling lower, and the light above flickered like it was caught between staying alive and giving up. Elaine pointed up toward it with a mock-serious expression. There's your battlefield, she said, handing me an old wooden ladder that creaked in protest the moment I opened it. I climbed carefully, feeling every unsteady wobble. She stayed at the base, steadying the ladder with both hands, her head tilted up. You're taller, she remarked, smiling. That's your rent advantage. Her voice carried a warmth that made me grin despite the nerves. As I unscrewed the light cover, I could feel her gaze on me, not intense, but aware. The soft hum of the house surrounded us, broken only by the occasional creak of the ladder. Careful, she murmured when I shifted my weight. Her hands gripped the ladder a little tighter. There was something unexpectedly intimate in the way she stood there, grounding me from below. When the bulb finally twisted loose, I climbed down slowly. She didn't step back right away. Our faces ended up closer than either of us planned, her eyes lifting to meet mine from just a few inches away. For a heartbeat, the hallway felt like it folded inward. The warm lamplight touched the edges of her face, highlighting the faint smile playing at the corner of her lips. I could hear her soft breath, steady but with the kind of quiet pause that said she felt the closeness too. Got it, I said, holding up the old bulb like a trophy to break the moment. She laughed softly, reaching up to brush imaginary dust from my shirt. Her fingers lingered a second longer than necessary, sliding gently down my chest before pulling back. Not bad, she said, her voice lower now, almost a whisper. We replaced the bulb together, moving in quiet coordination. When I climbed up again, she stayed close, her hands steadying the ladder like before. This time, though, I noticed her looking up at me longer, eyes soft, thoughtful, as if she were memorizing the moment. As I climbed down for the last time, our hands brushed again, an accident, maybe. But neither of us moved quickly to pull away. It was brief but charged, like static between fingertips in a quiet room. She exhaled softly, breaking into a small smile. See, she said. You're more useful than you think. I chuckled, but inside, something shifted. That small space, narrow hallway, soft light, her steady hands, had wrapped us into something neither of us had planned, but both quietly felt. We made our way back downstairs slowly, almost reluctantly, as if both of us knew something had changed in that narrow hallway but weren't quite ready to name it. The house had grown quieter, the kind of stillness that settles deep after a long conversation and shared moments. The fire in the sitting room had burned down to glowing embers, and the soft lamplight cast warm, honey-colored pools across the floor. Elaine walked a few steps ahead of me, her hand brushing the polished wood of the staircase banister as she descended. She didn't speak at first, and neither did I. But silence between us no longer felt awkward. It had weight now. Meaning. In the hallway by the front door, she turned to face me. Her expression was different, softer than earlier, the teasing replaced by something quiet and searching. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a small, almost shy gesture that didn't match her usual poised demeanor. "Well," she said finally, exhaling with a small smile. "Lights fixed. You've officially worked off a fraction of your rent." I laughed gently, rubbing the back of my neck. "Glad to be of service." She leaned lightly against the doorframe, mirroring the first moment I saw her earlier that day. Except now, the space between us hummed with something new. Her eyes held mine for longer than usual, her gaze steady but thoughtful, as if she were weighing a thought she wasn't sure she should say aloud. "You know," she said quietly, "you don't have to rush back to that empty studio every night." The words hung between us. Not flirtatious. Not commanding. Just soft. Real. I stepped closer, not deliberately, but drawn in by the sincerity in her voice. I could smell the faint trace of jasmine again, mingled with the earthy warmth of the fire that still lingered through the house. Her breathing hitched ever so slightly when I stopped just a little closer than casual conversation required. Her hand rose slightly, as if to touch my arm, then hesitated midair. Instead, she let it drop slowly to her side, her smile returning, gentle this time, almost vulnerable. "Good night," she whispered, her voice barely above the quiet of the room. "Good night," I answered, my voice lower than usual. She opened the door slowly, letting the cool night air slip in. It brushed against my face, sharp and fresh, a contrast to the warmth of her home. I stepped out, but before she closed the door, she lingered there, eyes on me, lips curved in the faintest smile, like she was leaving a space open for something neither of us had dared to define. The door closed softly, but the warmth didn't leave. It came with me. The next morning arrived crisp and clear, sunlight spilling through the thin curtains of my small studio like warm silk. I hadn't slept much. Every quiet moment of the night kept pulling me back to her doorway, the way she'd looked at me, the softness in her voice, that unspoken pause between us. It wasn't rent that was on my mind anymore. It was her. By late morning, I found myself standing on her porch again, hands in my jacket pockets, heart doing that quiet, uneasy drumbeat that only happens when something meaningful is about to shift. I told myself it was just to thank her again, but deep down, I knew better. I knocked. The door opened a moment later, and there she was. Elaine, barefoot, hair a little loose around her shoulders, wrapped in a light robe tied at the waist. She looked surprised at first, then a slow smile spread across her face, warm and welcoming. "Back already?" she asked, arching an eyebrow. "Yeah," I said, my voice a little rougher than usual. "I thought I'd stop by." She didn't tease this time. She simply stepped aside. "Come in." The house smelled of fresh coffee and something floral drifting in from the garden. She handed me a pair of gardening gloves from a basket by the door, her eyes twinkling. "Since you're in such a helpful mood, I could use another kind of rent payment," she said. "The backyard's a mess." Her tone was light, but the warmth behind it was unmistakable. We spent the next hour outside under the gentle morning sun. Birds flitted between branches, and the scent of damp soil filled the air as we worked side by side, pulling weeds, trimming branches, laughing at our own clumsy teamwork. Every now and then, our hands brushed when reaching for the same tool. Each touch was brief but grounding, like quiet acknowledgments that didn't need words. After a while, we sat together on the porch steps, catching our breath. The garden behind us looked tidier, but it wasn't the work that mattered. It was the ease that had settled between us. She rested her hands on her knees, looking out at the sunlight dancing on the leaves. "You know," she said softly, "it's nice, not doing this alone." I turned to look at her. She met my gaze, and this time, neither of us looked away. Slowly, almost instinctively, our fingers found each other on the step between us. They intertwined naturally, like they'd been waiting to. No grand declarations. No rushed moves. Just quiet warmth, shared in the open air. In that moment, settling differently had nothing to do with money. It was about belonging, unexpected, gentle, real.